Why are journalists under attack? Because democracy is under attack.
I realized I was working for something that was evil, and I had been a part of actually creating it.
When Mark Zuckerberg essentially said that it is okay for politicians to lie, that spells doom. My name is Maria Ressa, and I'm a journalist and author.
The message that the government is sending is very clear. Be silent or you're next.
I've received thousands of death threats online.
I'm Christopher Wylie. I'm a data scientist, but most people know me as the Cambridge Analytica whistleblower. Facebook knew about Cambridge Analytica's scheme since 2015. Before the story broke, Facebook threatened to sue The Guardian and then banned me for whistleblowing. I revealed how our data is being manipulated for political gain without our consent.
Since Rappler started reporting on President Duterte's deadly drug war, I've been repeatedly charged and arrested.
It makes you feel vulnerable. But I think that's the point, right?
I'm inspired by how Maria continues to stand up for the truth in the face of real danger.
Chris's revelations led to the largest data crime investigation in history.
If we allow cheating in our democratic process, and we allow this amount, what about next time? What about the time after that?
We know firsthand what happens when social media is weaponized.
And the danger it now poses to our democracies around the world.
This is an existential moment.
And it's time for us all to act.
It is so good to talk to you. You figured out, and then you created a system. You taught yourself how to code. You learned the data. And then you built this whole system that was very efficient at modifying behavior. And then you decided to take it down. When did you decide it was wrong?
When I first joined the company that later became Cambridge Analytica, SCL Group, I joined a company that at the time was working on projects that were geared towards counter-extremism and counter-radicalization, looking at how extremism spreads online. And we got discovered by a guy by the name of Steve Bannon, who, long story short, got a billionaire to acquire the company. And what I saw was that I had worked on a system that got essentially inverted to radicalize young men in the United States. And that, witnessing the inception of an insurgency, the alt-right campaign. And so when I started seeing videos of people in focus groups who were so angry with things that were frankly untrue, I realized I was working for something that was evil. And I had, been a part of actually creating it. And I couldn't keep doing that.
It's interesting when you said you were looking at it for counter-radicalization at first, right? So
Yeah.
I came to it because I was looking at how social network analysis spread the ideology of terrorism.
Yeah.
And we created Rappler because if you can convince people to blow themselves up with this radical ideology, why couldn't we
have something
use
powerful
it for good,
Yeah.
right? That's why we created Rappler. But then when you started seeing the negative parts, it's hard to pull yourself out. And to be a whistleblower, what gave you the courage to do that?
Yeah, I think, at least for me, growing up kind of as an outsider, I was partly in a wheelchair when I was growing up because of an invisible disability. And then lob on top of that, sort of being queer, I came out as a whistleblower, but I'd been coming out for my entire life. And, for me, it's that sense of otherness and comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That I think gave me a little bit of a nudge to help me become a whistleblower. But with setting up Rappler and being on the outside. I think you're going out there every single day, pissing off a lot of people.
I try not. No.
Do you find that your life's journey sort of influences that?
Oh gosh, I was born in the Philippines and then moved to the United States when martial law was declared in 1972. But when I was with Americans, I never felt completely American. And when I'm with Filipinos, I don't feel completely Filipino either. So I guess it's the otherness part of it, right? And that's a good training for journalism.
Or whistleblowing.
Or whistleblowing.
But I mean, and do you find that there's a bit of an overlap? Because not that I would ever call myself a journalist, but in some senses I feel
similar.
There's something similar about that, shoving uncomfortable information into people's faces and going, you have to pay attention to this, and then feeling the consequences of that.
So I was going to say that's the mission of journalism, right? You speak truth to power, and you'll know power doesn't like that. In your end, I think you've been speaking truth. I mean, there's a cost to yourself, but you also seem to learn something more from each instance that you've done that. Has this been a good experience or a bad experience?
It's a mixed bag, I guess. I mean, I think it's been, on the whole, a good experience. I've learned a lot.
So have we.
After watching 2016 happen and knowing so many things about what was going on, I learned that I do feel compelled to speak uncomfortable truths. But at the same time, getting called to testify at Congress, as a 20-something gay boy living in London, it's not something that you really expect to be part of your life journey. That was pretty intimidating. It was pretty intimidating to have, the Department of Justice and FBI sitting behind me and, giving me a subpoena after that. But I think on the whole, it's been a good experience, because if you think back before 2018, the idea that privacy or data protection, the internet would be a mainstream political issue in the 2020 election and the primary race would kind of be laughable. So I feel like, at least in that sense, exposing wrongdoing and exposing the structures that facilitate and support that wrongdoing with companies like Facebook have at least opened up an awareness into a conversation in our mainstream political discourse that I think is productive.
How easy is it to manipulate mass on a mass scale?
I get frustrated a lot by the current sort of discussion about election manipulation, because it so focuses on the United States and, to a slightly lesser extent, Britain. Because Britain and the United States, and I'm sure coming from the Philippines, you know this full well, have been manipulating elections and democracies around the world for hundreds of years. Britain was a
empire,
a specialist,
and colonizer. Okay.
The reason why the national drink in Britain is tea, and the national animal is a lion, and these are not natural things here. And so I think the reason why people are so upset in the United States or in Britain or other parts of Europe is an American voter now understands what it feels like to be an African voter. Because, living in a country where you've got a gradually eroding information system, where lies are everywhere, where you don't know what to trust. You've got foreign countries left, right, and center trying to manipulate you, trick you, deceive you, and corruption rife in the administration. Looking at the Philippines, it's something that I'd be interested, in hearing your thoughts on. Coming from an ex-US colony, where you had a large country dictating the terms of how government works, to becoming independent. Yeah. And now having a large American corporation run by a bunch of straight white dudes in America starting to influence, at least, what information is allowed or not allowed to exist, or what gets amplified and promoted, or what doesn't in the Philippines. Do you feel like there is a sort of neo-colonialism happening online?
So you're the first person I heard say that colonialism never died; it just moved online, right? And I think we talked about Facebook as the first level, which I mean, frankly, the collapse, the erosion of our institutions began on Facebook. What the description of the Philippines? Stanley Carnell wrote in Our Image, and he described the Philippines as a country that spent 450 years in a convent and 50 years in Hollywood. We were colonized by Spain and then the United States. And I think it's ironic that the country that gave democracy is also the place where Silicon Valley then has given someone like Duterte, Bolsonaro, these types of authoritarian leaders who are killing democracy, the power to do it, to manipulate people. But I think we all know that our countries in the global south bear the brunt of all the tech decisions that have been made, right? I mean, how do we get power? We've never really had a seat at the table in these things, and we bear the worst.
Do you think that you should get a seat at the table?
Sure, that's part of the reason I can speak about it is because I can articulate it in a way that the West can understand.
You currently are, challenging an allegedly and arguably corrupt regime. What does it mean for you to say, give us a seat at the table? Do you give a corrupt regime a seat at the table to talk about how...
No. So I think one of the things this time show us is exactly how human behavior is universal regardless of culture in many ways. Because the very same things that manipulate Americans and Europeans are the very same things that manipulate us in the global south. We just don't have the institutions to fight back. And look how weak your institutions have gotten here. Behavioral modification system. How do we fix it? I've been a journalist for, this is almost 35 years. Right? It's never been as hard to work as a journalist as it is today. I have to post bail 8 times. My government filed 11 cases and did 11 cases and investigations that year, and then began arresting me in 2019. First arrest was Valentine's, right? That was my Valentine's.
Happy Valentine's.
Oh, and my government seems to work very well in February. This February, they've gone and filed a similar case against the largest broadcaster in the Philippines.
What would you say, to your critics in the Philippines about the charges that, the government has lodged against you? Did you break the law?
Oh, my lordy. No, I am challenging power, right? We continue to do our jobs, and we will continue. The line I always use is, we are going to hold the line, because the Philippine Constitution, like the United States Constitution, has a Bill of Rights. We're patterned after the United States Constitution. And let me ask you this. What did Cambridge Analytica do in the Philippines?
The company operated in many places around the world. This is something that also I learned spending time there, that, it's really profitable to go and corrupt governments, because governments have, really monetizable assets. You've got sovereignty. It's something that's really hard for a company to replicate. And with that, you can dictate mineral rights, resource rights, passports, all kinds of things. In the Philippines, they had an office there. The story of the Philippines, you guys kind of got Trump before everybody else.
Okay. Yes. Actually,
you're facing prison and quite serious charges.
At least 80 years.
Why do you care so much?
Because then...
Wouldn't it be easier to just go somewhere else?
I mean, I could toss the same question at you, why you became a whistleblower, right? Because this is the time that matters. Because if I didn't stand up for the standards and ethics, the mission of journalism, when it matters, then everything else I did beforehand doesn't matter. Then I'm not who I am, defining who you are. I hate this time period. I hate that the baton was passed to me now, but that's why it matters. How do we get civic engagement when people don't know the facts?
I don't think we can. It's kind of like what we're doing right now. We're sitting on a stage, we're having a discussion, there's an audience, they know that we're talking. And if I say something that's not true, or somebody can call us out, or a journalist can call us out, what we have now is a situation where I can become invisible and I can go and whisper into everybody's ear, and they all hear something different.
Right.
And I can do that now with the benefit of having followed everybody in the audience around for years and years and years, reading through their text messages, listening to their phones, looking at everything that they look at, even when they don't realize that they're being watched. And I don't think that we can have a functioning democracy when there is no longer public discourse, because everything has become privatized. And oftentimes people don't even know if they're receiving something that is targeted or not.
Which again goes back to, if you get rid of transparency, you get rid of accountability, you get rid of democracy. We can take questions from the audience.
Maria, Julia Pizzetti from the International Centre for Journalists. I've spent time with you and with your news organisation, and I know that you have learned a lot as a result of the orchestrated disinformation campaigns, the deliberate targeting of journalists and Rappler in particular. Given that we're talking particularly about what Christopher has referred to as porting of these problems, from the global south to the west, can you tell us, sitting here in London, what journalists in particular dealing with these problems now can do to prepare themselves?
Oh, Lord. So I think this is an existential moment for democracy globally. Journalism, the death of journalism. I won't say the death of journalists, but the death of journalism is only the first signal for the death of democracy. Our dystopian present is your dystopian future if we don't do anything right now. And of course, with elections coming up in the United States, it's a huge problem. But what are the danger signals? The fact that we don't know the facts, one. The fact that you don't know whom to trust. Because in the Philippines, the first targets of attacks, and these are exponential attacks, right? I was getting an average of 90 hate messages per hour. In the Philippines in 2016, our data showed that women were attacked at least 10 times more than men. So misogyny, sexism, the kind of sexualized gendered attacks on women. What's the end goal? You pound someone to silence so that a whole narrative collapses. And then the voice with the loudest megaphone is amplified bottom up and then top down. Our president, for example, the attacks against me and Rappler, we were attacked for a year on Facebook, on social media. And then after that, a year later, President Duterte said the same exact thing, which is like astroturfing. It lays the groundwork for what the government does. You are all living through something similar. It's just our institutions crumbled within 6 months. Your institutions are a little bit stronger than ours, but human beings behave the same way. And the lack of trust is ushering in a whole new 1930s, 1940s, right? All of a sudden, we're looking at fascism. And I guess this is why I'm so scared, and I want Silicon Valley, I want the West, who have stronger institutions, to do something more about it. Because if we don't, instead of a year or 2 years of this, we're going to look at decades of fascism.
My question to you, Christopher, I am from Kenya. You worked for Cambridge Analytica in Nairobi. Over 70 people died, maybe directly or indirectly related to the role of Cambridge Analytica. My question then is it legal or moral for British or American firms to work in countries like ours and take advantage of lack of regulations and yet continue to operate?
This is something that I found most shocking. When you've got a company in country A, let's say it's in Britain, engaging with multiple firms and contractors, each in their own jurisdiction, creating disinformation or hate propaganda that, were it entirely in Britain, would be wholly illegal. And then disseminating that in another country, because you've got so many different players involved and so many different components of wrongdoing, it's actually really difficult to figure out where technically did a crime occur. In tax law, we're just starting to, create principles and rules that prevent people from just hopping from one jurisdiction to another. But with data and the internet, we are, where tax law was in 1950, not realizing that the internet is global, that data is global, that disinformation can be global. We lack, not only the actual institutions to police, but we actually lack principles until lawmakers start to understand actually how the internet works. And I don't mean that sarcastically, as in that it is actually global and that we need to create principles that embrace that globalness. Lots of wrongdoing can happen.
Maria, you have been threatened and yet continued your fight. I'm originally from Turkey and living in this country for the last 20 years. And in my country, many journalists are in jail now, and many others are afraid of writing, speaking. And so what do you say about journalism and fear?
We've never been as vulnerable as we are today, because power in countries like yours and mine has taken what the internet, what social media, what companies like Cambridge Analytica, and it isn't only Cambridge Analytica. We now have Filipino companies like Cambridge Analytica, right? They are the ones taking advantage of it. Why is it that the bad guys are the ones who are taking these tools of manipulation and using them against us? For us, for someone like Chan Dundar, for example, right? He had to flee his country, and he made the decision to do that for fear of his life. Others are dying. We see this in every single report that comes out about journalism. Why are journalists under attack? Because democracy is under attack, because you attack the truth tellers, because the integrity of facts is gone, right? We're not agreeing on the facts, and the internet, the way social media is set up, this one concept of growing it by having you choose friends of friends to grow has polarized our societies. So we have far more polarized societies, and then we have no understanding of what the facts are, and then you attack institutions. And when you have someone like your leader and my leader, they become stronger in this environment. They hijack. And this is why democracy is dying. In our areas of influence, we need to protect the facts, because if you don't have the facts, you can't have integrity of elections. You can't have integrity of markets. How can we have a working society if we don't have a public sphere where we agree on what the facts are? We've always had the devil and the angel on our shoulders, right? But the way the social media platforms have been formulated fans the devil in your ear.
Why is it that you're allowed to experiment on societies, and when real people get killed, there are no actual consequences? I'm sure a lot of people in the audience, have heard bits and pieces about what's going on in the Philippines. But from your perspective, what's the big deal? Why should we care about not only what you and your organization are experiencing, but what's more broadly happening in the Philippines?
I think that our organization, Rappler, has been fighting impunity on two fronts that are relevant to everyone around the world. The first is these information operations, the manipulation on Facebook, on social media, because when you say a lie 1,000,000 times, it becomes the fact. And then if you don't have facts, you then can create whatever narrative you want, including journalists are criminals, right? The second is connected to that, which is the impunity in the drug war. President Duterte, our president, was elected with the power of social media in 2016, May of 2016. Actually, this was the beginning of the dominoes tumbling down. May of 2016.
Before the alt-right got cool.
Right. But they're all connected now, I think, right? In our drug war, if you look at the numbers, the UN, our own Commission on Human Rights, says in a little less than 3 years, at least 27,000 people have died. These are huge numbers. In 21 years of Ferdinand Marcos, you're talking about a death toll of a little over 3,200. So impunity in the drug war, impunity in information operations. Our institutions collapsed within 6 months because we didn't have facts. And journalists like me are under attack. And it's not just little Rappler, which is a startup, although I guess I could go to jail for 80 some odd years because of the cases that have been filed. They are politically motivated. I am not doing anything different than I used to do when I was working 20 years ago.
What is different?
Tech. And I think one of the reasons you were fascinating to me is because you came into this, you looked at the code, you looked at the data, and you later realized its impact on society. I'm waiting for Silicon Valley to realize that as well.
Do you think Silicon Valley, which is predominantly run by white privileged men, large number of whom are American, do you think that plays a role?
Huge.
Like if more people from the Philippines or other countries were in leadership roles in tech, do you think that would make a difference?
I'd like to say if journalists were the ones making some of the tech decisions, it would be a little bit easier, it would be better. So when Mark Zuckerberg essentially said that it is okay for politicians to lie, that spells doom in this tech-enabled world, right? That spells the end of democracy, because you cannot tell fact from fiction. Before you can create a marketplace, you have to have rules of a marketplace, and the rules that we have in social media don't work. You also talked about values. What are the values? What are the values of tech?
Optimization, monetization.
Thank you. Right.
I think actually one of the things that lots of journalists even celebrated back when tech was cool was, the mantra of Facebook: move fast and break things. And the hubris of that, not really thinking that what you could be doing is breaking democracy, and not just in your own country, but around the world.
And even with the evidence there, right? So
well, it's interesting that you bring up the death toll of the current regime in the Philippines. I think to Myanmar,
yes,
where Facebook was actually warned by journalists, the United Nations, about what was happening, where Facebook's systems were being deliberately exploited to propagate hate messaging, which contributed, and this is not me saying it, this is the United Nations saying, contributing to ethnic violence and ethnic cleansing.
Yeah.
We would have thought that would be quite a big deal for any CEO to sort of be told that. When you look at Facebook's response about that, where, well, the world is complicated, we'll try harder, meanwhile thousands of people get murdered, do you think that there are parallels between what happened in Myanmar and what either is happening or could even progress to happen in the Philippines?
It's in every country, right? The ethnic violence is still continuing in Myanmar. The information operations that's led by the military is still continuing in Myanmar on Facebook. The guy who led that UN fact-finding was Marzuki Darusman. He's an Indonesian who used to head the Commission on Human Rights. That report is damning. Facebook has its own independent report, and they say the same things. I'm shocked. Nothing yet is moving. And that's part of the reason. So here we go. Like, what do we do? I mean, I'm not completely against Facebook. although right now I am. I mean, we're fact-checking partners.
You're
with
against
Facebook.
bad behavior.
I'm against impunity.
Yeah.
Right? If you look at it, every time Facebook tries to do the right thing, the market's incentives actually punishes them.
I provided a lot of information to American regulators. Facebook received the largest fine that a technology company had received in history.
Yeah.
$5 billion from the FTC and $100 million from the SEC. And the share value went up. We're in a weird situation now where you can be at the helm of a company that has received the largest financial penalty of a company in your industry in all of history, and shareholders go, great, let's buy more stock. Because the worst that can happen is that much money. When you do something really bad, sure, it's going to take a ding off of this year's profit margin, but hey-ho, that's it. What do you think can be done or should be done? Do you think that regulatory action can even work if one country has this regulation, another country doesn't?
I think some of the states in the US are now talking about data portability. I think that's a potential solution. So if you own your own data, you can take your data out of Facebook and put it into another social media platform.
Do you think that people would actually move, or do you think it would start to create potentially a two-tiered system where truth and privacy become luxury goods in a marketplace?
Interesting. That could be, but I'll tell you the behavior of Filipinos, given the poison that's been injected into Facebook, right? If you think of lies as poison. From the time Rappler was set up in 2012 all the way until 2016, Facebook was number one. In Alexa ranking, right? This is a ranking of all the websites. Now it's back to like number 7. We know something is wrong, but there's no other option.
I don't think data or information are morally wrong or morally good. I think that they're sort of
It's the way we
neutral.
use it. Yeah.
I think about it in a kind of like electricity. You can, power a studio. We can sit comfortably in a warm environment with lots of light, even though it's nighttime.
Yep.
You can also electrocute and kill someone. I remember when I was little, my grandmother would always freak out if there was cutlery anywhere near the toaster, because you could, die making toast. So yes, electricity is dangerous, but would you want to live without electricity?
Yeah.
And the way I sort of think about it is, well, what do we do about electricity to try to amplify the good things that it does and minimize the bad things that it does?
Yeah.
And we have safety standards. We've got building codes, wiring codes.
I like this part in your book. Yeah.
Imagine if Facebook was a building, right? Where the building has been designed deliberately to make it really hard to leave the building. It's a maze. And, the building powers itself every time you open a door. So there's lots of doors that go nowhere and you can't really leave. And at the front of that building, there are some terms and conditions in a book, 20,000 words, a short novella, exciting read outside. And then the door says, by the way, you agree that you've read this book outside and that you agree to everything that it says.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't tolerate that.
Right.
And we also wouldn't say that the onus should be on people to avoid that weird and wonky and perhaps dangerous building. We would be going, why are these buildings being designed this way, and why aren't there rules to prevent people from designing these buildings in the first place? For me, what I find so frustrating about Silicon Valley is that they will continue to win as long as they keep up the narrative that the onus and burden of safety and our democracy is on regular people rather than the people who design systems.
This is the first thing I said, because I was like, when I was getting attacked, they kept saying, you're a public figure and, it really, we can't do anything about it. Then I just thought, hello, I'm protected by the Constitution as a journalist. You've taken away that protection. And why is it the user's fault if you design it this way?
And who gets to let you choose what is allowable and not allowable on this platform? This is the thing that I find, really scary, is that, we have kind of relegated our democracy to Mark Zuckerberg. And I find that very terrifying.
But short, medium, long term, and of course my invested interest is in the short term, because I could go to jail if we don't find the right solutions for it.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I don't think that there are short-term solutions, because we have it's an infrastructure.
Yeah.
Imagine if you had a pharmaceutical company regulated like a tech company, where you don't actually have to do any kind of trials, you don't have to prove safety of your systems. You can just like experiment, and when something goes wrong, you can say, oh, sorry, like pharmaceutical business is complicated, biology is complicated, or an airline going, sorry, our plane crashed, it's hard to make things fly that are like really heavy, and sometimes, shit happens. But when you look at like the reaction that Facebook has, whether it was in Myanmar, in the Philippines, in New Zealand, Sri Lanka, like the list goes on.
The United States.
The press release is like a pro forma standard. The world is really complicated. We've got it wrong this time. We're going to work to do better. And I question, why is it that you're allowed to experiment on societies, and when real people get killed, there are no actual consequences? And I feel safe mostly when I go onto a plane or take a drug from a doctor. So I think that people should feel safe going online as well.
Yes, agree. They've gotten away with impunity so far, also because old power looked away. They abdicated responsibility to the young guys who know what they're doing.
Do you think that Mark Zuckerberg is in effect
a publisher,
a new editor, a new publisher?
Are they not publishing, right? And are they not allowing it? It's like they invited people to their house and they gave everyone guns and said it's the Wild Wild West. So yes, I think that. Wow, I can't believe I'm saying that.
Do you think that information is a weapon, or can be used as a weapon?
Oh my God, isn't it? Isn't the weaponization of information, isn't that what's killing democracy?
I think if you look at Donald Trump, he has eroded the American Constitution, has gotten away with an impeachment, and is at the same time putting children in cages at the American border. And undermining, civic cohesion in the United States. And I look at that, and I just think that there is destruction that is happening, and it is the product of information, or rather disinformation.
Absolutely.
And that is dangerous. And so in that sense, I think that information can be a weapon. But at the same time, journalists also use information, for good.
The gatekeeper in this public sphere. The world's largest distributor of news is Facebook. YouTube comes in a very close second, right, in terms of, and the designs of both of these platforms are optimized to manipulate, to sell us and our data at our weakest possible moment to the person or company that will pay for an intended result. It's like these are platforms now that are designed, they're behavioral modification systems, and we are Pavlov's dogs going in there. All right, wait.
On that note,
I know.
Perhaps let's open it up to Pavlov's dogs for some questions.
A lot of these challenges we're confronting right now are like, for example, epidemics. We've had a terrible measles epidemic in the Philippines. Got coronavirus right now, which is being significantly complicated by misinformation. Do you see any hope that those kind of real-world costs are going to start being recognized by even some of the more authoritarian actors?
So in the Philippines, I'll say yes. The government has now talked about how they're going to run after the fake news that's being said about the coronavirus, right? But then again, the government's own machinery is the one pumping out news, because it is pumping out lies, because it takes the attention, it refocuses attention from things going wrong. I guess I'm curious why the West always calls it misinformation. It's disinformation. It is meant to manipulate you. The disinformation networks go bottom up from each of our countries in the global South and connect to this kind of nervous system that in my country now is combining Russia and China. It is scary as all heck, but this is how information is weaponized for power. And who can control this right now? Silicon Valley, the immediate solution.
This is to Christopher. So in 2013, while you were still with SCL Group, you had set up a similar company called arg.us. And according to BuzzFeed, you had told an acquaintance of yours that you wanted to build the NSA's wet dream. And you also claimed that evil pays more. So
Sure, that's not true. One of the things that I've learned is that when you go up against a company that specializes in disinformation, it also uses that and creates narratives about people who criticize. So I don't take your assertion as valid, and it's simply not true. I did not set up that company. I do not remember, and I have not seen any actual substantive evidence to substantiate this flippant comment.
okay, well, it seems to me that you helped create these tools, which you admitted to building, and eventually these tools were misappropriated, and they were used to hijack elections and undermine democracy. So do you understand why some people would question your motives today?
Of course I understand that. And I think it's healthy for people to, have skepticism of anybody who talks about anything. I understand that I was involved in creating a company that, ended up doing some really terrible things, not just in the United States, but in many countries around the world. When I joined SCL, I was, 23, 24. I recognized that I did not know enough about what I was doing. And, I've learned a lot in that process. And that if there were regulations in place at the time when I first started that, for example, required me as a data scientist or as an engineer to make a proper assessment of risk, where there would be consequences if that did not happen. Not to say that Cambridge Analytica or other companies like it would never have existed or not exist in the future, but it would have made a lot of people think about what they're doing.
Considering the judicial and the political situation in the Philippines, what advice would you give to a potential Filipino whistleblower?
Chris first.
I hope it's not don't dare.
I'll say one thing. Lawyers, 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 lawyers. Talk to lawyers. Lawyers have saved my life on so many occasions. That's all I would say.
Whistleblowers in the Philippines have a horrendous track record. And part of the reason we have so few and the reason why fear now works is precisely because it is the whistleblower who suffers versus whoever they blow the whistle against. I've submitted myself to the men and women inside the judiciary who I hope will abide by the spirit of the Constitution, but I am very cognizant that they have families to protect, they have reputations and ambitions, and this makes our justice system extremely flawed, but I submit myself to that.
This is for Christopher. You've recently been banned from Facebook, and there's been a study to show that when people deactivate their Facebook accounts, they generally become happier. So I was wondering if this has affected your mood at all.
So yeah, I'm banned on Facebook, and I'm also banned on Instagram because it's owned by Facebook. So my life no longer has well-curated pictures of avocado toast and thirst traps. Am I happier without using Facebook? Not really, and here's why. It's really hard to stay in touch with people without using the two main systems that everybody else uses. Facebook didn't just sort of deactivate my account in sort of a normal way. I got like completely erased off of Facebook. Like, I don't exist anymore. And my photos, my memories, my friend groups, all went away. And when you look at other examples in history of where the sort of collective memory of a person is erased. You had that in, for example, the Soviet Union, where if you spoke out against the regime, you would be disappeared, not just physically, but like literally your photos would go away. Mentions of you would go away. And it felt really weird to look at, 10 years of my life disappearing. They didn't just ban me, they deleted me. And it felt really weird to be deleted. I am more broadly happier. I feel lighter because I've sort of gone through this somewhat unscathed in that sense. But I do miss being able to be in touch with people. I think for me, my final thought is that we've got a really serious problem. To me, it feels like the kinds of existential crisis that we have, in some ways like climate change. You don't notice the incremental changes in democracy until you no longer have it. But I hope that people take that to heart and, that if you think that that's worrying, then, make your voice heard and be angry about it.
The two biggest battles, and you mentioned them both, is climate, because we will die. And you can't fix climate if you don't have the information. The battle for our world, the battle for truth. These are the two battles that is pivotal. This year is pivotal. If we don't do the right things, we will lose both. It is death by 1,000 cuts. And we must do more. I don't think it's being a Debbie Downer, because obviously we have hope. We must have hope because we have to fix it. I think human values haven't changed. We've always had the devil and the angel on our shoulders, right? But the way the social media platforms have been formulated fans the devil in your ear and encourages us against them, splintering our public sphere apart. So each of us can take a role. We get rid of the lies in our immediate areas of influence. We look for what binds us together rather than what pulls us apart. We act a little bit like outsiders so that we can understand and analyze a little bit better. And I think for the journalists in the audience, there is no time that requires the mission of journalism, of truth tellers. No time like now. We need to do this, and we need to do it now.
The purpose of a tyrant, right, is to make anything else unimaginable. The first dictatorship is the dictatorship in your mind.
There are no superheroes. The only superhero who's going to save us is ourselves. It's us, the 99%.
The only thing that beats the politics of hate is the politics of solidarity.